The first thing I remember is the smell. Bleach. So much of it that it burned my nose and made my eyes water. It was a desperate chemical scream trying to silence the coppery scent beneath it. My knees ached from the cold, hard oak floorboards, the ones Richard had insisted on, imported from some ancient forest in France. They were supposed to be the foundation of our perfect home. Now, they were a witness. My hands, wrapped in yellow rubber gloves, trembled as I scrubbed at a single, stubborn stain that seemed to bloom wider the more I tried to erase it. It was a dark ruby flower on the pale wood. A flicker of red and blue light danced across the living room wall, painting streaks over the family portraits. Lily, smiling with a missing front tooth. Josh, holding up a soccer trophy, his face beaming with pride. Richard and I, on our wedding day, looking like two people who had never known a moment of doubt. The siren's wail grew closer, a mournful cry slicing through the manicured silence of Maple Creek. I have missed a spot, near the leg of the grand piano. A single, perfect droplet of blood sat, mocking me. It wasn't supposed to end like this. It was never supposed to get this far. 6 months earlier, the autumn sun in Connecticut is a liar. It spills golden light over everything, making the world look warm and forgiving. But the air carries a crisp, sharp edge that promises decay. It was the kind of day that made Maple Creek look like a movie set. The lawns were impossibly green. The colonial houses stood proud and white, and the maple trees lining our street were a riot of fiery red and blazing orange. It was a postcard of American perfection, and I was living right in the middle of it. My day began, as it always did, with the quiet hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. I packed up perfect lunches. For Lily, a turkey sandwich cut into the shape of a star, apple slices with a side of caramel dip, and a note that said, "Shine bright today." For Josh, a more substantial roast beef on rye, a bag of pretzels, and a note that said, "Score a goal for me." It was part of the performance, the role of the perfect mother. After they were on the school bus, their bright backpacks shrinking in the distance, the silence of the house would descend upon me. It was a heavy, expensive silence, the kind you can only buy with a corner office on Wall Street and a 7-figure bonus. The house was my kingdom. 4 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen that belonged in a magazine, and a living room so perfectly arranged that no one ever actually lived in it. I would walk through the rooms, my bare feet silent on the imported oak floors, and run my fingers along spotless countertops. Everything was in its place. Everything except me. I used to be an artist, a restorer. To be specific, I spent my days in dusty studios, leaning over canvases centuries old, carefully bringing forgotten colors back to life. My hands were always stained with turpentine and pigment. There was a purpose in that work, a quiet conversation with the past. But when I married Richard, and then when Lily was born, that part of my life was gently packed away. Like a precious painting stored in a dark, climate-controlled vault. Richard said he wanted me to be happy, to not have to worry about work, and I believed him. I convinced myself that this was a better dream. "Hey, Elle, just calling to check in." Richard's voice came through the car's Bluetooth speaker. I was on my way to the organic market. Even our errands were perfect. "Listen, I'm going to be late tonight. We're trying to close the Henderson deal. Don't wait up for me." "Okay," I said, my voice practiced and light. "Everything all right?" "Everything's great. We nailed this. And that place in the Hamptons is as good as ours." He spoke of our future in terms of assets and acquisitions. Love was a stock that paid dividends in the form of luxury goods. "Oh, happy anniversary. By the way," my heart did a little flutter. He remembered. After 14 years. Sometimes the simple act of remembering felt like a grand romantic gesture. "Happy anniversary. Richard, I left something for you on the bed. You'll like it." And then, before I could respond, "Gotta go. Board members are walking in." "Love you." The line went dead. "Love you." The words were a period at the end of a sentence, not an emotion. A habit. That evening, I found the gift exactly where he said it would be. A long, slender box from Tiffany's, tied with a pristine white ribbon. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a diamond necklace. It was an eternity necklace. A perfect, unbroken circle of brilliant cut stones. It was exquisite. It was cold. It was worth more than the car I was driving. I clasped it around my neck, and the diamonds felt like tiny chips of ice against my skin. When Richard finally came home, well after midnight, I was waiting for him in the living room, wearing the necklace over a simple black dress. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up with the thrill of his victory at work. "There she is," he said, loosening his tie. "You got it. It looks beautiful on you." He kissed my cheek. His lips were dry and tasted of stale coffee. "It's stunning." "Richard." "Thank you." I touched the diamonds. "You remembered." "Of course. I remembered." He walked to the bar cart and poured himself a generous measure of scotch. 14 years. It's a milestone." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Did the kids give you any trouble?" "No. They were angels." "Good. Good." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled only by the clinking of ice in his glass. This was it. The moment I dreaded and craved. The moment to try and connect. To find a crack in the polished veneer of our lives. "Do you remember?" I began softly. "The painting I gave you for our first anniversary." He frowned, his mind clearly still crunching numbers from the Henderson deal. "The painting." Vaguely. "A landscape, wasn't it?" "One of yours." My chest tightened. "It was a cityscape," I corrected gently. "At the little street in Florence where we had that amazing dinner. You said you loved the way the light hit the cobblestones." I stayed up for a week painting it from a photograph. He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes distant. "Right. Florence. That was a great trip." He didn't look at the painting, which was hanging on the wall right across from him. A small, vibrant piece lost among the larger, more expensive art he had bought at auctions. He had never really seen it. He saw its value as a memory, an artifact from our shared history. But he didn't see the hours I had poured into it. He didn't see the love. "I still have it. You know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The little box of pastels you gave me that year. You said you wanted me to always have something that was just for me." Richard finally looked at me, a flicker of seething annoyance. Confusion? In his eyes. "Ellie, that was a lifetime ago. You have a beautiful home. 2 amazing kids. You have this." He gestured vaguely around the perfect room. "Isn't that enough?" He didn't mean it to be cruel. In his world, it was a logical question. He had provided the framework for a perfect life. He had delivered on every promise. He couldn't understand the emptiness that echoed within that framework. He couldn't see that he had given me a beautiful cage, but had forgotten to leave the key. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. A woman in a designer dress, adorned with diamonds, standing in a house that was the envy of everyone in town. I looked perfect, and I had never felt more invisible. The diamonds on my neck didn't feel like a gift. They felt like a payment, a final installment for a soul I had sold so long ago. I could barely remember what it looked like. That night, as I lay in our king-sized bed, the space between Richard and me feeling as wide as an ocean, I knew with a chilling certainty that enough was the one thing it would never be. The lie of our perfect life was beginning to crack, and I was terrified of what might crawl out. The next morning, the diamond necklace lay on my nightstand, winking in the morning light. It felt alien, like an artifact from someone else's life. I went through the motions of my morning routine of perfect lunches, the cheerful goodbyes at the bus stop, the silent survey of my spotless home. But today, the silence wasn't just empty. It was suffocating. Richard's question from the night before, "Isn't that enough?" echoed in every room. It was a question that demanded an answer, and I didn't have one he would understand. I found myself in the garage, standing in front of a tall metal cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. My fingers fumbled with the rusty latch. Inside, the smell of linseed oil and old paper hit me like a memory. There they were, my canvases, stacked and wrapped in yellowing cloth. My brushes, their bristles stiff with disuse, and the small wooden box of pastels Richard had given me all those years ago. I ran my fingers over the smooth, cool sticks of color, cerulean blue, burnt sienna, cadmium yellow. They were like old friends I had abandoned. On an impulse I didn't fully understand, I decided to drive into town. Not to the organic market or the high-end boutique, where the other Maple Creek wives spent their afternoons. I drove to the older, less polished part of town, where the rents were cheaper and the buildings had a little more character. There was a small gallery that I'd read about in the local paper. Croft Gallery, known for showcasing local artists. I told myself I was just looking for inspiration. A little spark. Anything to feel like the old Ellie again. The gallery was a single, large room with high ceilings and worn wooden floors that creaked with every step. Sunlight streamed in through a large storefront window. illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The walls were covered with paintings, bold, abstract pieces humming with color and emotion. They were messy and chaotic and beautiful. They felt alive. I was standing in front of a particularly striking canvas, a swirling vortex of deep blues and violent slashes of white, when a voice spoke from behind me. It's about a storm. Not on the ocean, but the one inside your own head. I turned, startled. A man was leaning against the doorframe, wiping his paint-stained hands on a rag. He was maybe a few years older than me, with kind, tired eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. He had dark, unruly hair threaded with silver, and a 2-day stubble that gave him a rugged, unkempt look that was the complete opposite of the clean-shaven, tailored men of Maple Creek. This had to be Julian Croft. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "No, it's all right," I managed, feeling strangely flustered. "It's powerful." I gestured towards the painting. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's what I was going for. I'm Julian. By the way." He offered me a hand, then seemed to remember the paint and pulled it back with a self-deprecating laugh. "Probably best not to." "Eleanor," I said. "Ellie." "Well, Ellie," he said, his gaze lingering on the painting, then shifting back to me. "What does it make you feel?" It was a simple question, but no one had asked me what I felt about anything in a very long time. I was asked about dinner plans, school schedules, and charity auction committees. My feelings were not a required part of the agenda. It feels, I searched for the right word. Loud, and a little bit lonely. He nodded slowly, his eyes studying me with an intensity that was both unsettling and incredibly validating. Loud and lonely. That's a good way to put it. He walked closer, standing beside me. He smelled of turpentine and coffee, a scent that felt more like home than the expensive cologne Richard wore. "You're an artist," he stated. It wasn't a question. I laughed. A short, surprised sound. "I used to be. A long time ago." "What makes you say that?" He gestured towards my hand. "The faint stain of phthalo blue under your thumbnail, and the callus on the side of your middle finger, right where a brush would rest." I looked down at my own hand as if it belonged to a stranger. I hadn't even noticed the faint blue stain from opening my old paint box. For years, my hands had been defined by a simple, elegant wedding band and a flawless manicure. But he saw something else. He saw the ghost of the person I used to be. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I was a restorer, I admitted, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I worked at the Met before I moved out here." "The Met? That's serious business," he said, his expression one of genuine respect. "Why'd you stop?" The standard answer was on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to focus on my family. I wanted to be a mother. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was messier. It was about slowly fading until I wasn't sure where the wife and mother ended, and where Eleanor began. "Life happened," I said simply. It was a vague answer, but he seemed to understand the universe of meaning packed into those 2 words. "Life," he echoed with a wry smile. "It has a habit of doing that." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, just looking at the art. It was a different kind of silence than the one in my house. This one was filled with unspoken understanding. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. "You should pick up a brush again," he said softly, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "You still have the eyes for it. I can see it. You don't just look at the paintings. You're trying to figure out how they were made." A warmth spread through my chest, a feeling so unfamiliar I almost didn't recognize it. It was hope. I wouldn't even know where to start. I confessed. "You start by starting," he said with a shrug. "I teach a few small classes here. In the back studio. Nothing formal. Just people who want to put some paint on a canvas. You should come by sometime. No pressure." The offer hung in the air between us, shimmering with possibility. It felt dangerous and exhilarating. It was a door opening into a world I thought I had locked forever. It would mean lying. It would mean carving out a piece of my life that was just for me. Hidden from Richard. Hidden from Maple Creek. I'll think about it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The door's always open," he said, giving me another one of his easy smiles. I left the gallery feeling dizzy, my heart hammering against my ribs. The golden autumn sunlight seemed brighter, the colors of the leaves more vibrant. The brief conversation with Julian had been like a splash of cold water on a sleeping face. It had woken me up. As I drove home, back to my perfect house and my perfect life, I glanced at my hand on the steering wheel. I saw the diamond ring Richard had given me, a symbol of the life I had. And right next to it, I saw the faint blue stain under my thumbnail, a reminder of the life I had lost. That night, Richard was late again. I put the kids to bed, walked through the silent, perfect rooms, and ended up in front of the Florence cityscape painting. For the first time, I didn't see it as a symbol of what I had lost with Richard. I saw it as proof of what I once had within myself. When my phone buzzed, I thought it was Richard with his usual apology, but it was an unknown number. A text message. Hope I'm not overstepping, but I found your gallery's old website. You did incredible work on that Vermeer. The light in the restored section is breathtaking. Jay. My breath caught in my throat. He had looked me up. He had taken the time. He had seen my work and understood it. It was a simple message, but it felt more intimate than any gift of diamonds. It was a message that said, I see you. The real you. My fingers trembled as I typed back a reply. Thank you. That means a lot. I hit send. And with that simple act, I knew something had shifted. A line had been crossed. I wasn't just thinking about opening the door to that other world anymore. I had just unlocked it. The lie was surprisingly easy to tell. It slid off my tongue with a smoothness that both impressed and horrified me. Brenda Dixon told me about a new art class in town. I said to Richard over breakfast a few days later. Just a casual thing. For beginners. I thought it might be nice to, have a hobby. Richard looked up from his iPad. His brow furrowed for a second. Not with suspicion, but with the mild confusion of a man trying to process an irrelevant piece of data. Brenda's name was the key. She was the undisputed social queen of Maple Creek. The head of every committee. The organizer of every charity gala. If Brenda's name was attached to it, it was legitimate. It was safe. In our class? He repeated. Sure. L. Whatever makes you happy. He had already dismissed it, his attention returning to the stock market ticker scrolling across his screen. It was that simple. My secret life was born, sanctioned by a casual, disinterested wave of his hand. He hadn't asked where it was, or who was teaching it. He didn't care. The space I was carving out for myself existed in his indifference. My first class was electrifying. I walked into Julian's studio, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The studio was a beautiful, chaotic mess. Canvases in various stages of completion were propped against the walls. Jars bristling with brushes covered every surface, and the air was thick with the rich, earthy smell of oil paint. It felt like coming home. You came, Julian said, a pleased smile spreading across his face. He had set up a fresh canvas on an easel for me in a corner flooded with natural light. I came. I confirmed, a nervous laugh escaping me. There were no other students. I hadn't really expected there to be. The class is very exclusive, he said with a wink, seeming to read my mind. He didn't try to teach me in a formal way. He just talked. He talked about color theory not as a set of rules, but as a language of emotion. He showed me how a slight shift in a shadow could change the entire mood of a subject. He put a brush in my hand, and at first, my fingers felt clumsy, alien. But as he spoke, as he encouraged me, something began to awaken. The old instincts, the muscle memory. I started painting something simple, a bowl of fruit he had on a small table. But I wasn't just painting an apple. I was painting the memory of sunlight on its skin, the subtle bruise on its side, the way its roundness felt heavy and real. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't a wife or a mother or a resident of Maple Creek. I was just a woman with a brush in her hand, trying to translate the world into color. And Julian watched me. He didn't hover or criticize. He just watched. His gaze a quiet, steady source of encouragement. It was more intoxicating than any compliment. I started going twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, after the school bus had left and before I needed to start thinking about dinner. Those hours became my sanctuary. They were the only hours of the week that belonged entirely to me. I told Richard the first was having coffee with Brenda or running errands for the school bake sale. The lies began to stack up, each one a brick in the wall I was building around my new reality. Our conversations in the studio began with art but quickly deepened. I told him about my life as a restorer, about the thrill of revealing a hidden detail in a centuries-old masterpiece. He told me about growing up in a grimy, industrial town in Ohio, and how painting was his only escape. We talked about our dreams, the ones we had achieved and the ones we had let go. Richard thinks providing for me is the same as loving me. I confessed one afternoon, dabbing a streak of ultramarine blue onto my canvas. He gives me things. A beautiful house. Expensive jewelry. But he never gives me his time. His attention. I feel like one of his acquisitions. Something he owns and displays. The words tumbled out. Words I had never dared to speak aloud to anyone. Julian stopped his own work and looked at me. His expression serious. Being seen. He said softly, "That's all any of us really want, isn't it? To have one person in the world look at us and see who we really are, not the role we're playing." He understood. He didn't offer platitudes or solutions. He just understood. In that moment, the bond between us solidified into something deeper than friendship. It was a kinship of lonely souls. The more time I spent with Julian, the more the cracks in my perfect life became gaping chasms. I started to notice things I had previously ignored. The way Richard would talk over me at dinner parties, turning my anecdotes into punchlines for his own stories. The way he would check his phone constantly, while our children were trying to tell him about their day. The polite, vacant smiles of the other Maple Creek wives, women who measured their worth in carat sizes, and the prestige of their children's preschools. I was living in a beautifully decorated cage, and Julian was the only one who seemed to notice the bars. My art was changing, too. I moved on from still lifes to landscapes, painting the fiery autumn trees of Maple Creek. But my paintings were different from the postcard reality. There was a darkness in them, a melancholy in the shadows, a sense of turbulence in the sky. My repressed feelings were bleeding onto the canvas. One Thursday, I was so engrossed in my work that I lost track of time. My phone buzzed in my purse, jolting me back to reality. It was a text from Richard. "Running late. Pick up my dry cleaning on your way home?" Panic seized me. The dry cleaner was on the other side of town. I was supposed to be at a PTA meeting. Another lie. "Ellie, you okay?" Julian asked, noticing the color drain from my face. "I'm fine. I have to go. I'm late." I started frantically cleaning my brushes, my hands shaking. He gently took the brush from my hand. "Hey, slow down. It's okay." His fingers brushed against mine. In a jolt, a current of electricity shot up my arm. It was a simple, accidental touch, but it felt earth-shattering. I froze, my eyes locking with his. The air in the studio suddenly felt thick, charged with an unspoken energy. He didn't pull his hand away. His thumb slowly, deliberately, stroked the back of my hand. The gesture was incredibly gentle, yet it felt more profound, more intimate than any touch I'd received from my husband in years. I should have pulled away. I should have run out of that studio and never come back. I should have remembered the pictures of Lily and Josh on the mantelpiece. My vows. The 14 years of my life I had invested in being Mrs. Richard Vance. But I didn't. I just stood there, my breath caught in my chest. As his gaze dropped to my lips, he leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to stop him. And in that moment, I realized I didn't want to. I wanted to feel something real, even if it was wrong. I wanted, just for a second, to not be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. I just wanted to be Ellie. His lips met mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question. And then, as I leaned into it, it deepened. It was a kiss full of longing and understanding, of shared loneliness and a desperate, reckless hope. It tasted of turpentine and coffee and the end of one life and the beginning of another. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. The unspoken had been spoken. The line had not just been crossed, it had been erased. "I have to go," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I know," he said, his eyes searching mine. I fled the studio without another word, my mind a whirlwind of guilt, exhilaration, and terror. As I drove through the perfect, tree-lined streets of Maple Creek, I felt like a spy in my own life. I had a secret that could burn it all to the ground. And the most terrifying part was, a small, treacherous part of me wanted to watch it burn. After the kiss, everything changed. The carefully constructed wall between my two worlds crumbled. My life was no longer divided into the real world of Maple Creek and the secret world of the studio. Now, there was only the intoxicating, terrifying reality of the affair. The guilt was a physical presence, a cold knot in my stomach that tightened every time I kissed my children goodnight. I'd look at their innocent, sleeping faces and feel like a monster. I'd watch Richard across the dinner table, meticulously cutting his steak, and a wave of shame would wash over me. He was a flawed husband, distant, preoccupied, emotionally unavailable, but he was a good man in his own way. He was a good provider. He didn't deserve this. But the guilt was always followed by a dizzying rush of exhilaration. With Julian, I wasn't just a wife and mother. I was a woman. I was an artist. He would look at me, his eyes full of a raw, unfiltered admiration that I hadn't realized I was starving for. He traced the lines on my hands and called them a map of my talent. He listened for hours as I talked about art history, not out of polite indulgence, but with genuine fascination. He loved my mind. He loved the part of me that Richard had catalogued and filed away under past hobbies. Our meetings at the studio became more frequent, more desperate. The pretense of an art class was still my official alibi, but we spent less time with canvases and more time with each other. We'd make love on a paint splatter, draw cloth on the floor, the sunlight from the large windows warming our skin. It was messy and passionate and utterly real. It was everything my sterile, scheduled life with Richard was not. I was living on a knife's edge, and the danger was part of the allure. I bought a second phone, a cheap prepaid burner, just for him. I memorized his number and deleted every text as soon as I read it. I became a meticulous liar, a master of misdirection. I created a labyrinth of fake coffee dates, non-existent PTA subcommittees, and imaginary charity drives. My calendar, once a simple grid of soccer practices and dental appointments, became a complex document of espionage. One crisp October evening, the Maple Creek Country Club held its annual autumn gala. It was the social event of the season, a mandatory performance for people like us. I wore a backless, emerald green dress that Richard had picked out. He loved showing me off. It was part of his portfolio. "You look incredible, Elle," he said as he adjusted his bow tie in the hall mirror. "Absolutely stunning." He smiled at our reflection. We looked like the perfect couple from the cover of a magazine. The successful husband, the beautiful wife, a lie in a gilt frame. At the gala, I played my part. I smiled until my cheeks ached. I made small talk with other wives about Montessori schools and vacation plans for the holidays. I laughed at the bad jokes of Richard's business partners. But my mind was elsewhere. It was in a dusty studio across town, with a man who probably hadn't even noticed there was a gala tonight. "Ellie Vance, you look $1,000,000. Brenda Dixon materialized at my elbow, a glass of champagne in her hand. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over me. "Missing nothing. That dress is divine. Richard is a lucky man." "Thank you, Brenda," I said, forcing a smile. "You look lovely too." "Oh, this old thing." She waved a dismissive hand at her own designer gown. "So, tell me everything. I feel like I barely see you anymore. You're always rushing off somewhere. How is that little art class of yours going?" My blood ran cold. The casual question felt like an accusation. It's going well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's very relaxing. You'll have to show me some of your work sometime," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'd love to see it." Was she suspicious? Or was it just my own paranoia? Now a constant companion, twisting an innocent comment into a threat? Brenda was the hub of all Maple Creek gossip. If she sensed even a hint of something amiss, the whole town would know by morning. Later that evening, feeling suffocated by the polite chatter and fake laughter, I slipped out onto the terrace for some air. The cool night air was a relief. I pulled out my burner phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed a message to Julian. "I'm trapped in a cage made of champagne and small talk. Thinking of you." The reply came almost instantly. "I'm thinking of a woman in an emerald dress. I bet you're the most beautiful thing in that whole place. Come see me. Just for a minute." It was reckless. It was insane. Richard was inside, schmoozing. Anyone could see me leave. But the pull was irresistible. The idea of escaping, even for 20 minutes, was like a lifeline. I found a side exit, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I practically ran to my car, my heels sinking into the soft grass of the club's lawn. I drove the 10 minutes to Julian's studio with the windows down, the cold air whipping through my hair, feeling more alive than I had all night. He was waiting for me. The studio door opened. The moment I stepped inside, he pulled me into his arms. He kissed me deeply, his hands tangling in my hair. "Emerald green," he murmured against my lips. I knew it. He ran his hands down my back, his touch electric against my bare skin. "You have no idea how beautiful you are. I can't stay." I whispered, even as I melted into his embrace. This is crazy. Let it be crazy, he said, leading me further into the studio. Just for a little while. He had lit candles, and in their flickering light, the chaotic studio looked magical. He put on some soft jazz music. He poured me a glass of cheap red wine, which I drank from a smudged jam jar. It tasted better than the expensive champagne at the gala. We didn't talk much. We just held each other. For those few precious minutes, I wasn't Richard Vance's wife. I was just Ellie, in the arms of a man who saw me. The sound of my other phonemy reel vibrating in my clutch was a brutal intrusion. It was Richard. My stomach plummeted. Where are you? His voice was tight, clipped, not angry, but controlled. That was always worse. I just stepped out for some air. I stammered, trying to sound casual. It was getting a little stuffy in there. Brenda Dixon said she saw you drive off. The cold knot in my stomach turned to ice. Of course. Brenda saw everything. Oh. I realized I left the oven on at home. The lie was clumsy. Pathetic. I just panicked and drove back to check. I'm on my way back now. Silly me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing the lie. Weighing it. The oven. He said flatly. Right. Well, get back here. We're about to leave. He hung up. He didn't believe me. I wasn't sure. But the cold finality in his tone terrified me. I have to go, I said to Julian, my voice shaking. He knows. I think he knows. Hey, Julian said, taking my face in his hands. Breathe. It's going to be okay. But it wasn't going to be okay. As I drove back to the country club, the exhilaration was gone, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. The walls were closing in. I had been playing with fire, telling myself I could control it. But now, I could smell the smoke. The perfect life I had been so desperate to escape from suddenly seemed precious. And I had the terrible feeling that I had just lit the match that would burn it all down. The drive back to the country club was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every shadow on the road looked menacing. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like an accusation. I parked in a dark corner of the lot and took a deep breath. Trying to compose myself, I smoothed down my emerald dress, wiped the corner of my eye where my mascara had smudged, and plastered a serene smile on my face. The performance had to be flawless. When I re-entered the ballroom, the gala was winding down. I saw Richard standing near the exit, talking to another couple. He looked perfectly at ease, laughing at something the other man said. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he had bought my flimsy excuse about the oven. He saw me and excused himself, walking over to me. His expression was unreadable. There you are, he said, his voice neutral. He took my arm, his grip a little tighter than necessary. Ready to go? Yes, I said, my own voice a little too bright. Sorry about that. Total brain fog. He didn't respond. We said our goodbyes, the perfect couple making their graceful exit. In the car, the silence was a tangible thing, heavy and cold between us. I stared out the window at the perfect houses of Maple Creek sliding by, their windows glowing with warm, happy light. They looked like tiny dioramas of lives untouched by deceit. So, Richard said finally, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Brenda seemed concerned. She said you looked upset when you left. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was just flustered. I said, sticking to the lie, worried about the house. The oven has an automatic shut-off. Ellie, he said, his tone still perfectly level. We've had it for 5 years. You know that. He knew. He absolutely knew. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with chilling calm. He was laying out the pieces, showing me he wasn't a fool. I guess I forgot. I mumbled, my cheeks burning with shame. He turned onto our street and pulled into the long, curving driveway, the headlights washing over the facade of our beautiful home. He switched off the engine, but made no move to get out. He just sat there, staring at the house. We have a good life here, don't we? He said softly. It wasn't a question. A beautiful home, healthy children, a respected place in the community. I've worked very hard to build this, to give you all this. I know you have. Richard, I whispered. He finally turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the dashboard, his eyes were cold and hard. Then don't burn it down. Ellie, he said. his voice dropping to a near whisper, but carrying more menace than any shout. Whatever it is you're doing, stop. It was a warning. A clear and direct command. He wasn't asking for the truth. He didn't want the messy, emotional confrontation. That wasn't his style. He was a businessman. He was identifying a threat to his assets and neutralizing it with a calculated, verbal strike. He was telling me that he knew I was a liability, and he was giving me one chance to correct my behavior before he took further action. The affair should have ended right there. The sane, rational part of me knew that. The mother in me screamed that I was risking my children's happiness. The wife in me recoiled from the cold threat in my husband's eyes. But the woman who had rediscovered herself in Julian's studio, the artist who had started breathing again, refused to go back into the cage. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our house became almost unbearable. Richard was a ghost of polite indifference. He was never angry, never raised his voice. Instead, he became meticulously attentive in a way that was more unsettling than any fight. He would call me multiple times a day to check in. He would ask for detailed accounts of my day, his questions light and casual, but his eyes probing, searching for inconsistencies in my stories. He bought me a new tablet, a surprise gift, and insisted on setting it up for me himself, linking it to our family's cloud account. I knew what it was. It was surveillance. The pressure was immense. I felt like I was being watched constantly, my every move scrutinized. The joy I had found with Julian was now tainted with a constant, gnawing fear. The lies became more elaborate, more exhausting to maintain. I tried to break it off with Julian. I met him for what I told myself would be the last time, at a small, secluded park halfway between our towns. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words catching in my throat. I couldn't look at him. He knows. Richard knows something is going on. He's watching me. It's too dangerous. Julian listened, his expression pained. He reached out and took my hand. He said gently, you could leave him. The words hung in the air. A shocking, radical idea. Leave the house, the life, the children. The concept was so enormous, so catastrophic, that my mind couldn't fully grasp it. I can't, I said, shaking my head. My children, I can't do that to them. I would lose them. Richard would make sure of it. I knew the kind of ruthless, high-powered liars he would hire. He would paint me as an unstable, adulterous woman. He would use my secret to destroy me and take my children away. The thought was paralyzing. So you're just going to go back to that life? To being invisible? Julian's voice was filled with a desperate sadness. Ellie, you've come back to life. I can't bear the thought of you just fading away again. It's better than my life blowing up. I cried, tears finally streaming down my face. You don't understand what he's like. He doesn't get angry. He gets strategic. We stood there, at an impasse. He was offering me a different life, a life that was terrifying and uncertain, but real. Richard was offering me a return to my gilded cage, with the door now locked and the bars reinforced. That night, the true turning point came. I was in my home office, supposedly organizing receipts, but really trying to figure out how to untangle the mess I had made of my life. Richard came home unexpectedly early. I heard his footsteps on the oak floors and quickly minimized the browser window, where I had been looking at Julian's gallery website. My heart almost stopped when I saw he was holding my burner phone in his hand. He must have found it in my car. I had been so stupid, so careless. I had hidden it in the glove compartment, thinking it was safe. I was looking for the insurance card, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He placed the phone on the desk between us. It felt like a bomb. And I found this. Is there something you want to tell me? Ellie. My mind raced, desperately searching for a lie, an explanation, anything. But there was nothing. The game was up. I stared at the cheap plastic phone, and all I could do was shake my head, silent tears blurring my vision. I expected him to yell, to scream, to throw things. I was prepared for a storm of rage. But Richard did none of those things. He simply looked at me, a strange, cold calm settling over his features. He didn't look hurt. He didn't look betrayed. He looked interested, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. Okay, he said softly, nodding to himself. He picked up the phone. Okay, I see. He turned and walked out of the room, taking the phone with him. He didn't slam the door. He closed it gently behind him. The quiet click of the latch echoing in the silent house like a gunshot. That quiet click was the sound of my life changing forever. The confrontation hadn't been a fiery explosion. It had been a cold, silent execution. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the war had just begun. He wasn't going to divorce me. That would be too messy. Too public. No. Richard Vance was going to handle this his own way. And I was terrified to find out what that meant. The days following Richard's discovery of the phone were the strangest of my life. I had braced myself for an explosion. For lawyers and shouting matches. For the public demolition of our family. Instead, I got something far more unsettling: nothing. Richard didn't move into the guest room. He didn't stop speaking to me. On the surface, absolutely nothing changed. He still kissed me on the cheek in the morning. He still asked about the kids' days at dinner. He still called me Elle. But it was all a performance. A meticulously crafted illusion for the benefit of the children and, I suspected, for himself. The man I was living with was a stranger wearing my husband's face. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a flat, analytical coldness. He would look at me, but it felt like he was looking through me. Calculating. Planning. The politeness was the most terrifying part. It was the eerie calm at the center of a hurricane. He was no longer the distant but generally benevolent provider. He was now my warden. And our perfect home was my prison. He never mentioned the phone again. He never mentioned the affair. He simply began to quietly, systematically, dismantle my freedom. It started with small things. He updated our home security system, installing new cameras that covered every exit. For peace of mind, he'd said with a thin smile. He insisted we consolidate our finances into a single joint account that he monitored daily, claiming it was more efficient for tax purposes. My personal credit card was canceled. I was given a debit card linked to the joint account. Every coffee, every gallon of gas, was now a transaction he could see. My art classes came to an abrupt end. I was thinking, he said one evening, as if the idea had just occurred to him, "You've been spending so much time on that hobby. Why don't you volunteer to run the fall fundraiser for Lily's school? Brenda Dixon is overwhelmed. You'd be a huge help." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an assignment. My time was no longer my own to schedule. It was his to allocate. He was filling my days with legitimate, observable activities, leaving no room for secrets. I was trapped. I had no way to contact Julian. My burner phone was gone. And I knew Richard was almost certainly monitoring my real phone and my new tablet. Going to the studio was an impossible risk. I felt like I was suffocating, cut off from the only person who made me feel alive. My world had shrunk to the manicured lawns and silent, judgment-filled rooms of Maple Creek. The psychological warfare was relentless. Richard became the perfect husband in public. At school functions, he would put his arm around me, smiling for the other parents, praising my work on the fundraiser. He was building a narrative. He was a devoted, supportive husband. And I was a fulfilled, busy wife. He was making sure that if I ever tried to leave, no one would believe my side of the story. Who would believe that this charming, successful man was a cold, calculating monster behind closed doors? I would look like a hysterical, ungrateful woman. One afternoon, while organizing silent auction items in the school gymnasium, Brenda Dixon approached me. "You and Richard seem so happy lately," she commented, her eyes scanning my face for a reaction. "He was just telling my husband the other day how proud he was of all the work you're doing here. It's so lovely to see." I felt a chill run down my spine. He was planting seeds. He was managing my reputation, curating public opinion. It was a hostile takeover of my life. "We're doing well," I said, the light tasting like ash in my mouth. But Richard's plan was more sinister than just control. I realized he was also gathering information. He must have gone through the burner phone. He must have found Julian's number, his texts, his name. A week later, Richard came home with a small, framed painting. He unwrapped it with a flourish and presented it to me. "I saw this in that little gallery in the old part of town," he said, his voice casual. "I thought you might like it. It's by a local artist, a Julian Croft." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I stared at the painting. It was one of Julian's abstract landscape, full of the turbulent, emotional energy that I loved. Richard had bought my lover's art and brought it into our home. He hung it in the hallway, right outside our bedroom, a place I would have to pass every single day. It was a trophy. It was a threat. It was his way of telling me, I know everything. I know who he is. I own this now. 2. I own the one thing you thought was yours. Every time I looked at that painting, my stomach twisted in knots. It was a constant, silent reminder of my transgression and of Richard's chilling, absolute power over me. He hadn't confronted Julian. He hadn't started a fight. He had done something far more cruel. He had commodified my secret, turning a symbol of my passionate freedom into just another one of his possessions. I began to feel like I was losing my mind. The strain of the constant performance, the fear, the isolation it was eating away at me. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. The other Maple Creek wives commented on how tired I looked. "You're working too hard on that fundraiser, Ellie," they'd say with synthetic sympathy. I had to see Julian. I didn't know what I would say, but I knew I had to warn him. I had to know if he was okay. Richard's behavior was so unnervingly calm. I started to have dark thoughts. What was he capable of? After weeks of careful planning, I finally found a window of opportunity. I told Richard the first was taking a car full of fundraiser donations to a storage unit on the far side of town. It was a legitimate errand, one he couldn't easily object to. My hands were shaking as I drove, not towards the storage unit, but towards Julian's studio. I parked a block away and walked, pulling the collar of my coat up, feeling like a fugitive. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I reached the gallery, I peered through the window. It was dark. A small, handwritten sign was taped to the inside of the glass door. "Gallery closed until further notice." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. Closed? Why? I tried the door. Locked. I knocked, my knuckles rapping sharply against the glass. No answer. I peered through the mail slot, into the darkness of the gallery. It looked empty. Dust gathering on the floor. It looked abandoned. Where was he? Had Richard done something? Had he threatened him? My mind spun with terrible possibilities. I pulled out my real phone, my hands trembling too much to type properly. I searched for his name online, for any news, any clue. And then I found it. Not a news article, but a public record, a property transaction. Croft Gallery, and the apartment above it, had been sold 2 weeks ago. The buyer was a shell corporation. I didn't need to dig any further. I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, who was behind it. Richard hadn't just hung Julian's painting on our wall. He had bought the whole building. He hadn't just removed Julian from my life. He had erased him from the town. He had used his money and his power to surgically remove the one thing that gave me hope, leaving not even a scar. I stumbled back to my car, gasping for air, the world tilting on its axis. This wasn't about revenge for a betrayal anymore. This was a demonstration of absolute, terrifying control. He wasn't just a warden. He was a god in the tiny universe he had created. And he had just shown me that he could move heaven and earth to keep me in my place. And if he was willing to do all of this, what else was he capable of? The fear I felt was no longer just about losing my children or my life. It was a primal fear for my own safety. The discovery that Richard had bought Julian's building sent me into a silent, spiraling panic. It was a move of such breathtaking arrogance and control that it completely recalibrated my understanding of the man I had married. This wasn't a wounded husband lashing out. This was a corporate raider executing a hostile takeover of my soul. Julian hadn't just been a lover. He had been my rebellion. And Richard had acquired him, asset stripped him, and liquidated him from my life. For the next few weeks, I was a ghost in my own home. I went through the motions of running the school fundraiser, of making perfect star-shaped sandwiches, of attending soccer games. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part of Eleanor Vance. But inside, I was hollowed out. The fear was a constant, low-grade fever. I would watch Richard as he helped Josh with his math homework or read Lily a bedtime story, and the normalcy of it was grotesque. He could be this gentle, patient father, and at the same time, a man who could systematically dismantle another person's life without ever raising his voice. The duality was monstrous. I became obsessed with finding Julian. I spent hours late at night, after Richard was asleep, using the library's public computers to search for him. I scoured social media, public records, art forums. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. There was no forwarding address, no new gallery, no digital footprint. It was a clean, professional erasure. Richard's work. My desperation must have been showing. I grew thin, my sleep plagued by nightmares. My carefully constructed mask of suburban contentment was beginning to crack. It was Brenda Dixon. Of all people. Who noticed? Ellie. Honey. You look like you're about to shatter, she said one afternoon, catching me in the aisle of the grocery store. Her usually sharp, gossipy tone was replaced with something that sounded almost like genuine concern. Is everything all right with you and Richard? Everything's perfect. I lied, the word tasting like poison. She gave me a long, searching look. No one's life is perfect, Ellie. If you ever need to talk, she let the offer hang in the air. For a second, I was tempted. The urge to confess, to unload the terrifying weight of my secret, was overwhelming. But I couldn't. Admitting the truth would mean admitting what a fool I'd been. It would mean unleashing a scandal that would hurt my children. So I just shook my head and forced another smile. The night of the fall fundraiser arrived. It was the culmination of weeks of my forced labor. Held in the grand, wood-paneled hall of the Maple Creek Country Club, the room was filled with the town's elite, smelling of money and perfume. I was the star of the show, the perfect hostess. Richard was by my side, playing the proud husband to the hilt. She's done an incredible job, hasn't she? He said to anyone who would listen, his arm possessively around my waist. My Ellie. She can do anything she sets her mind to. It was a public branding, a final stamp of ownership. I felt like I was moving through a dream. I smiled, shook hands, and thanked people for their donations. But all I could think about was Julian. Where was he? Was he safe? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. Late in the evening, I found myself alone for a moment by the silent auction tables. My phone, the one Richard monitored, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My breath caught. Need to see you. It's urgent. My old studio. Back alley entrance. Midnight. Come alone. Jay. It was him. My heart leaped with a frantic, desperate mix of joy and terror. He was alive. He was reaching out. But how? And why now? The message was a spark in the suffocating darkness of my life, but it could also be a trap. Was it really him? Or was this another one of Richard's cruel, elaborate games? The timing was so perfect. On the night of my big event, the risk was enormous, but the thought of never knowing, of spending the rest of my life wondering what had happened to him, was worse. I had to go. I had to know the truth. Leaving the gala wasn't hard. I told Richard the first had a blinding migraine and needed to go home. He looked at me, his eyes unreadable, and then nodded. Of course. Elle, you've done more than enough tonight. Go rest. Was that a flicker of suspicion in his eyes? Or was I just projecting my own guilt? I drove home, my mind racing. I changed out of my evening gown and into simple jeans and a dark sweater. I waited until the house was completely silent, until the clock on the mantelpiece chimed its 12 mournful bells. Then, like a thief, I slipped out the back door, my car keys clutched in my sweaty palm. The old part of town was deserted at midnight, the storefronts dark and shuttered. A cold wind rustled dead leaves along the sidewalk. I parked down the street from the gallery and made my way to the back alley. The air was thick with the smell of damp garbage and decay. My footsteps echoed ominously on the cracked pavement. The back door to the studio was a heavy, steel thing. It was slightly ajar. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Julian, I whispered into the darkness. It's me. It's Ellie. The studio was pitch black. The air was cold and stale. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I turned on its flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene of utter chaos. The studio, which Richard had supposedly bought, hadn't been cleaned out. It was a wreck. Canvases were slashed, furniture was overturned, and dried paint was splattered across the floor like blood. A struggle had happened here, and then the beam of my flashlight fell on a figure lying on the floor, near the overturned easel. It was Julian. He was lying on his back, his eyes wide and vacant, staring up at the ceiling. A dark, sticky pool was spreading out from under his head, staining the wooden floorboards. In the center of his chest was a small, neat hole. I think I screamed, but I couldn't hear it. The world went silent, all sound replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I stumbled forward, my legs refusing to hold me. I fell to my knees beside him. He was cold, so cold. And that's when I heard the sound. A quiet click. The sound of the heavy steel door locking behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark. And there he was, stepping out from the deepest shadows of the studio. My husband. Richard. He wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't look angry or crazed. He looked calm. Disappointed. Even like a teacher who had caught a student cheating on a final exam. He was holding a small, metal object in his hand. A heavy, abstract sculpture from Julian's collection. There was blood on it. I knew you'd come, he said. His voice a soft, reasonable murmur that was more terrifying than any scream. I have to admit, Ellie, I'm disappointed. I really thought you were smarter than this. After everything I did to protect our family, my mind couldn't process it. You sent the text? I stammered, the words tasting like acid. Of course, he said, taking a step closer. He wouldn't have been much use to me otherwise. He was uncooperative. The truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was an execution. Julian hadn't just been my lover. He must have discovered something. Something about Richard's business. The shell corporation that bought the building. It wasn't just about me. It was about money. He found out. Didn't he? I whispered, my voice trembling. About your work. The money. Richard's face tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine anger. He was a loose end. He got greedy. Started asking questions. Making threats. I made him a very generous offer to disappear. He refused. He looked down at Julian's body with utter disdain. He was a sentimental fool. Just like you. He took another step. The beam of my flashlight caught the glint of something in his other hand. My burner phone. I'm going to have to call the police now, Richard said, his voice full of mock sadness. I'm going to tell them I followed you here. Worried about you. That I walked in and found this terrible scene. A lover's quarrel turned tragic. He attacked you. You panicked. And you defended yourself. He held up the bloody sculpture. Your fingerprints are all over the studio, Ellie. On his paintings. On his things. You were here all the time. Everyone will believe it. A cheating wife. Caught in the act. Terrified of losing everything. He was framing me. He had orchestrated this entire night. The text. The body. The story. It was all a perfectly executed business plan to solve his problem. And I had walked right into the center of it. I stared at the man I had lived with for 14 years. The father of my children. And I saw him for what he truly was. Not a husband. Not a man. A monster. Wrapped in a bespoke suit. I was no longer a wife to be controlled. I was just one last. Loose end to be tied up. For a long moment, I could only stare at him. The man who had slept beside me for 14 years. The man who had held my hand while I gave birth to our children. My mind, fractured by shock and grief, struggled to reconcile that man with the cold-blooded strategist standing before me. He had planned this. He had built my cage. And now he was going to lock me in it and throw away the key. All while pretending to be the victim. A strange calm washed over me, displacing the terror. It was the calm of absolute loss. I had already lost everything. Julian was gone. The love I thought I had with Richard was a lie. The life I had built was a sham. When you have nothing left to lose, you are no longer afraid. The children. Richard. I said. My voice quiet, but clear and steady. The sound of it surprised me. It was not the voice of a hysterical woman. It was the voice of a restorer, assessing the damage. What about Lily and Josh? You would let them believe their mother is a murderer? He actually sighed. A sound of profound disappointment. I will tell them that their mother was a wonderful woman who made a terrible mistake. I will raise them. I will protect them. They will be fine. They'll have their father. That is what's most important. Stability. Stability. That was his word for it. He would murder and lie and destroy people. And he would call it stability. He saw our family as a company. And he was simply a CEO removing a compromised executive to protect the brand. My eyes darted around the ruined studio. My flashlight beam dancing over the destruction. Slashed canvases. Broken sculptures. A frantic, violent search. But my restorer's eye, the part of me he had tried to bury, saw a pattern. The destruction wasn't random. It was a search. He had been looking for something. Something Julian had. Something that threatened him more than our affair. You were looking for it, weren't you? I said, my voice gaining strength. When you wrecked this place, it wasn't just a staged crime scene. You were searching for the proof. Richard's calm facade faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of seething annoyance. Surprise crossed his face. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I continued, my mind suddenly working with a chilling clarity. Julian found out. About the shell corporations. About how you've been laundering money through art sales. He wasn't blackmailing you for money. Was he? He was going to expose you. He was a good man. He was going to do the right thing. I looked from the destroyed art on the floor to the empty spaces on the walls. And then it hit me. The piece of the puzzle that had been staring me in the face for weeks. Hanging in the hallway of my own home. The trophy. The thread. The painting he had bought. I started to laugh. It was a terrible, broken sound. Echoing in the dead silence of the studio. Oh, Richard. You are so arrogant. You are so sure of your own brilliance. Stop it. Ellie. He warned. His voice taking on a harder edge. You searched his entire studio. I said. Getting to my feet. My legs shaking but holding. You tore apart everything he ever made. But you never thought to check the one piece you already owned. Understanding dawned on his face. Followed by a wave of cold fury. He finally realized his mistake. The painting. I whispered. The irony, a bitter taste in my mouth. The one you hung outside our bedroom. You thought it was a trophy. A symbol of your victory over me. But you have no appreciation for art. Richard. You only see its price tag. You never really looked at it. Julian was a restorer's son. He knew how to hide things. A ledger. A memory stick. He probably sealed it between the canvas and the stretcher bar. He hid the proof of your crimes in the one place you would never think to look, in plain sight. We stared at each other across the body of the man who had been caught between us. The power had shifted. He held the key to my prison cell. But I held the key to his. He could frame me for murder. But I could expose him as a high-level criminal. We were locked in a stalemate of mutual destruction. His face was a mask of controlled rage. You have no proof. Don't die. I challenged. All it would take is one anonymous phone call to the SEC. One suggestion to x-ray the artwork in the Vance collection. They'll tear your entire life apart. Richard. The perfect house. The country club membership. The respect of this town. It will all be gone. You will lose everything you killed to protect. The sound of a distant siren sliced through the night. He must have called them before he even entered the studio. His perfect plan was already in motion. It's too late. Ellie. He hissed. They're coming. It's your word against mine. Then we'll go down together. I said. And for the first time. I meant it. The next hours were a blur of flashing lights, disembodied voices, and the cold, professional touch of uniformed officers. I was taken to the police station. My hands bagged. My clothes taken as evidence. I didn't resist. I didn't speak. I just let it happen. Now, I am sitting in a small, gray interrogation room. The air is stale, and the coffee they gave me is cold. Across the metal table, a detective with tired eyes is watching me, waiting for me to talk. Richard is in another room, just down the hall. I can imagine the story he is telling. The performance of a lifetime. The grieving, betrayed husband, shocked to his core by his wife's violent secret. They've laid out the facts for me. My fingerprints are everywhere. My secret phone calls and texts establish a clear motive of jealousy and fear of exposure. The evidence against me is overwhelming. They are offering me a deal if I confess to manslaughter, a crime of passion. But I know the truth. I have a choice. I can accept their deal. I can go to prison for a crime I didn't commit. Richard, the murderer, would go free. But he would also be safe from financial investigation. My children would lose their mother. But they would keep their father. Their home. Their life. The perfect family would survive. In its own twisted, broken way. Richard would win. Or, I can tell them everything. I can tell them about the money laundering. About the painting hanging on my wall. About the real reason Julian is dead. I can give them the thread that will unravel Richard's entire empire. It won't save me from prison, in fact. It might make things worse. I would be an admitted adulteress and a potential accessory. But I would take him down with me. I would get justice for Julian. My children would lose both their parents. Their father revealed as a monster. Their mother as a fool. Their perfect world would be obliterated forever. The detective leans forward. Ellie. He says. His voice gentle. We need you to tell us what happened in that studio. I look at my reflection in the two-way mirror on the wall. I see a stranger with haunted eyes. I think about my children. sleeping in their beds, unaware that their lives have been irrevocably destroyed. I think about Julian, who deserves so much more than to be a loose end. I think about the painting, the silent witness hanging in my hallway, holding the final, ugly truth. The truth that the real crime wasn't the affair, or even the murder. The real crime was the perfect, hollow life we were all pretending to live. I take a slow, deep breath, the first one that doesn't feel like it's cutting my lungs. The choice is impossible, and I know what I have to do.